In their newly bought house somewhere in Spain, a man named Hector is carrying a box with a wooden table, while his wife Clara is planting new flowers outside. His phone suddenly rings, but when he answers, no one speaks. When he tries to call back, only an answering machine picks up. He gets startled when Clara calls him, causing him to drop the phone under the sofa. When she asks who it was, he says he has no idea since nobody has their new number yet. They start getting intimate, but in the middle of it, Hector notices that the answering machine is still recording, so he turns off the phone. Later, Hector uses his binoculars to look around the forest and spots a woman taking off her shirt. He's interrupted when Clara asks for the car keys because she's heading out to buy food. After she leaves, Hector picks up the binoculars again, but the woman is no longer there. Curious, he decides to go into the forest. He finds a bicycle lying beside a toppled garbage bin. A few moments later, he sees the same woman, now unconscious and completely unclothed. As he approaches, someone suddenly stabs his arm with a pair of scissors. Terrified, Hector runs away. Using his binoculars, he spots the attacker, a man whose head is wrapped in blood-stained bandages. Hector keeps running until he stumbles upon a strange building in the middle of the forest. He breaks inside and notices a sketch pinned behind a calendar. He later discovers a laboratory and finds a walkie-talkie on the table. When he speaks into it, someone answers. Hector explains that a bandaged man is trying to kill him. The person on the other end says he's in another building and will come over. Moments later, the man radios again, saying he has spotted the bandaged man on the surveillance cameras. He instructs Hector to come to the silo where it's safer. Guiding him through the walkie-talkie, the man lights a path for Hector. But soon, he warns Hector to run because the bandaged man has found the same path. Hector finally reaches the other building, where the man turns out to be a scientist. Looking outside, Hector sees a car that might belong to the bandaged man. The scientist urges him to hide inside a large machine. Hector hesitates, but when the bandaged man peeks through the glass window, he quickly gets inside. He panics when the scientist doesn't follow him in, but it's too late. The machine fills with liquid, and Hector begins to drown. Then a bright light flashes, the liquid disappears, and the machine opens. Hector climbs out, confused. When he steps outside, it's daytime again, and the bandaged man is gone. The scientist looks at him strangely and asks who he is. Hector, just as confused, asks what the scientist did to him. Neither of them understands what happened. Hector grabs his binoculars and looks toward his house. He sees Clara planting flowers, just as she did earlier. Shocked, he looks again and sees himself carrying the same wooden table he brought home earlier. He can't believe what he's seeing. The scientist takes the binoculars, equally stunned. He tells Hector that he has somehow traveled back in time. Hector insists on going home, but the scientist warns him he can't. They realize that Hector has only gone 1 hour back into the past. They return to the building Hector broke into earlier, and this time, the glass is still unbroken. Inside, the scientist takes a calendar, pins it to the wall, and draws a sketch to explain what happened. It's the same sketch Hector saw the night he broke in. The scientist now calls him Hector 2, while the one at the house is Hector 1. He explains that Hector 1 will soon leave his house, just like Hector 2 did. But for that to happen, they need to make sure everything happens exactly the same way. He tells Hector 2 to stay hidden while he prepares the machine. The scientist will wait until nightfall, and when Hector 1 shows up, he'll put him inside the machine and send him to the past. That way, Hector 2 can return to his normal life. Once the scientist leaves, Hector 2 picks up the phone and calls his house. Hector 1 answers, then drops the phone in surprise when Clara calls him. Hector 2 freezes, realizing this was the same call where no one spoke earlier. The phone rings again, and the scientist hears it, rushing back. When he plays the voicemail, he realizes Hector 2 called his own house. Angry, he scolds Hector 2, but when Hector 2 explains that he had already received that same call before, the scientist calms down and says things still align. He warns Hector 2 not to change anything else, but as soon as he leaves to check on the machine, Hector 2 secretly takes the car keys and drives away. While driving, Hector 2 spots a woman riding a bicycle. He stops in the middle of the road, staring at her, lost in thought. Suddenly, a van crashes into his car, sending him off the road and into a tree. The crash cuts his head, so he takes the bandage from his arm and wraps it around his head, slowly realizing he's the bandaged man he saw earlier. The woman rushes to him and asks if he's okay. She tries to call for help, but there's no signal in the area. When Hector 2 looks closely at her, he recognizes her as the same woman he saw naked in the forest. She helps fix his bandage using a pair of scissors. While she's distracted, Hector 2 quietly takes the scissors from her hand. Looking around, he spots the garbage bin he had seen before. He asks the woman to help him with something, and she parks her bike near the trash, where he also finds a jacket. She follows him into the woods, but when she decides to turn back, Hector 2 blocks her path, making her nervous. Moments later, the woman finds a chance to run. Hector 2 raises his binoculars and sees Hector 1 watching the forest from a distance. He realizes he must make the same events repeat, including the woman undressing, to keep the timeline consistent. He finds her again and, holding the scissors, orders her to do as he says. The frightened woman begins to undress while Hector 1 secretly watches through his binoculars. But as she takes off her pants, she kicks Hector 2 and runs. He chases her and catches up, but when he grabs her, they both fall down a hill, leaving her unconscious. He then removes her clothes to recreate the scene and hides nearby, waiting. When Hector 1 arrives, Hector 2 stabs him with the scissors, causing him to flee. Hector 2 then mimics the pose of looking through invisible binoculars, the same gesture he once saw the bandaged man make. He repeats it several times until he sees Hector 1 running away. Hector 2 goes back to look for the woman, but she's nowhere to be found. He returns home and notices the place is empty. As he climbs the stairs, a wooden table suddenly hits him, knocking him down. When he gets back up and goes upstairs again, the attacker has already escaped through the window. Hearing another noise, he follows it until he reaches the roof. There, he spots someone's feet hanging over the edge. As he tries to pull her up, she slips and falls. Hector 2 rushes down to check, and to his horror, he realizes the woman who fell is his wife. Devastated, he collapses in grief. He takes out his walkie-talkie and hears the scientist talking to Hector 1. Moments later, Hector 2 radios the scientist, identifying himself as Hector 2, and also as the bandaged man. He tells the scientist to bring Hector 1 to the silo, saying he'll come afterward. At the silo, Hector 2 peeks through the window, scaring Hector 1 and causing him to hide inside the machine. Once Hector 1 disappears, the scientist approaches Hector 2 and says he needs to be examined since he's the first person to ever travel through time. But Hector 2 now wants to use the machine again, hoping to prevent his wife's death. The scientist refuses, saying it's too dangerous. Hector 2 then threatens to destroy everything if he doesn't let him in. The scientist throws away one of the machine's batteries and claims it can no longer work. When Hector 2 discovers that a battery is missing, he grabs a crowbar and hits the scientist, who finally admits that he tossed it away. Hector 2 forces him to look for it. The scientist warns that using the machine again would create chaos since there would be 3 of him this time. Hector 2 promises not to interfere and says he'll let Hector 2 chase Hector 1 as before. Then Hector 2 realizes why the scientist really threw the battery, because he knew Hector 2 would try to use the machine again. Furious, Hector 2 hits him, and the scientist finally confesses that another version of him, Hector 3, has already appeared earlier. Eventually, Hector 2 finds the missing battery and convinces the scientist to start the machine again. He removes his sweater, and the scientist powers up the device, sending him back 40 seconds before Hector 2 had first come out. Moments later, Hector 3 emerges from the machine. He finds the scientist staring at him in shock. Seeing him for the first time, Hector 3 calmly tells him that the machine works, and that he's from the future. The stunned scientist can hardly believe it, so Hector 3 slaps him and warns him to just play along, or he'll report that the scientist used the machine without permission. Then Hector 3 hides as Hector 2 steps out of the chamber. Afterward, while Hector 2 remains inside the building, Hector 3 asks the scientist for a car. The scientist gives him a red van. On the road, he spots the same woman riding her bicycle. Later, he sees Hector 2's white car and deliberately crashes into it, setting the same chain of events in motion again. But while trying to escape, Hector 3 loses control of the van and crashes off the road. Moments later, Hector 3 regains consciousness and calls the scientist, telling him that he has failed. But then he spots the woman and realizes this is the same moment when she was running from Hector 2, the bandaged man. He tells her they're both escaping from the same person and assures her that the man won't find them where they are. Soon after, the woman discovers a nearby house, which turns out to be Hector's home. She helps him get inside, then leaves for a while. Moments later, his wife appears, frightened because she just saw a bandaged man outside. Hector 3 hides her in the basement and begins setting everything up exactly as it happened before. He throws the wooden table, which hits Hector 2 and knocks him down. He then tells the woman that the bandaged man is after her and that to fool him, she must wear a jacket. He cuts her hair and convinces her to run to the attic for safety. Afterward, Hector 3 brings his wife out of the basement, and they sit quietly outside, listening as the events unfold inside the house. It's then revealed that the woman, not Clara, is the one who fell from the roof and died, while Hector too heads back to meet the scientist, unknowingly completing the cycle.